I remember Brenda's words like they were carved into stone in my brain. Alex, what are you doing with your life? Playing with old toys? That useless hobby of yours won't pay the rent, let alone a mortgage. You are wasting your time. She always had that smirk, like she knew some secret truth about the universe that I was too dumb to grasp. Funny how things turn out. That useless hobby, the one she loved to trash talk every chance she got, just paid off not one, but 2 mortgages. Mine and hers. Yeah, you read that right. Hers. The woman who made my life a living hell with her constant put-downs is now mortgage-free because of the very thing she ridiculed. My name is Alex. For years, I lived under the shadow of Brenda's judgment. Brenda isn't just some random neighbor. She's my cousin, my mother's sister's daughter. We grew up practically next door to each other, our families intertwined in the messy dance of holidays and forced Sunday dinners. But somewhere along the line, Brenda decided she was superior. She got a proper office job, bought a house with a sensible loan, and generally lived what she considered a respectable life. Me? I never fit into her neat little boxes. My passion, my so-called useless hobby, was retro gaming archaeology. It wasn't just playing old video games. It was about finding lost pieces of gaming history. I spent countless hours digging through flea markets, estate sales, dusty old attics, and even online forums where collectors traded secrets. I wasn't just looking for games. I was looking for prototypes, unreleased versions, rare editions, even developer notes. It was like being an Indiana Jones for digital artifacts. I meticulously cleaned them, repaired them, cataloged them, and sometimes, if they were truly unique, preserved them digitally for history. Brenda thought it was childish. She'd walk into my small apartment, see my shelves packed with old consoles and cartridges, and just shake her head. Still playing with those old boxes, Alex? Don't you think it's time to grow up? Get a real job. You are almost 30. You have a mortgage to pay. Your parents must be worried sick. She'd say this loudly, usually when my partner Chris was also present, trying to embarrass me. Curious, bless his heart, always defended me, but even he sometimes had that worried look in his eyes when the bills piled up. Our mortgage was a constant weight. We bought a modest house, nothing fancy, but the payments felt like a giant boulder on our backs. Every month it was a scramble. I worked part-time jobs, anything to keep the lights on and contribute. But most of my real passion, my real time, went into my hobby. I believed in it. I knew there was value in what I did, even if it wasn't immediately apparent in dollar signs. I saw stories in those old games, a connection to the past, a piece of art that deserved to be saved. Brenda just saw junk. One time, I found a near mint condition prototype cartridge of a game that was widely believed to have never left the development stage. It was hidden in a box of old VHS tapes at a garage sale. The seller just wanted it gone. I paid $5 for the entire box. I knew what it was. My heart was pounding. This was a significant find in the retro gaming community. I didn't tell Brenda, of course. She would have just scoffed. But I sold it to a prominent collector for a decent sum. Enough to cover a few months of mortgage payments. Felt like a triumph, a secret victory against Brenda's nagging. But it wasn't the big one. Not the one that would shines everything. At Trafe, Dan Twangs. The funny thing is, while Brenda was busy judging my life, her own life was quietly falling apart. I didn't know the full extent of it then, but I got glimpses. Stressed phone calls about work, vague complaints about money, the way she sometimes avoided eye contact when talking about her own house. I just brushed it off. I had my own battles to fight. Little did I know, Those battles were about to intersect in the most unexpected and, frankly, jaw-dropping way. The hobby she mocked, the hobby she called useless, was about to become her unexpected savior. And I was the one holding the keys to her future. It's a story of perseverance, secret projects, desperate times, and a payoff so big, it still feels like a dream. But it's also a story of how easy it is to misjudge others, and how sometimes the most mocked paths lead to the greatest victories. And sometimes those victories come with a very strange, very complicated price. My retro gaming archaeology wasn't just about finding old games. It was about the meticulous process. Think of it like a historian finding an ancient scroll. You don't just read it. You preserve it, understand its context, learn its language, and share its story. For me, that meant researching the game's development, the studio, the designers. It meant carefully cleaning the circuits, sometimes soldering new components, even restoring old consoles to working order. It was a labor of love, requiring patience, precise hands, and an encyclopedic knowledge of gaming history. Brenda, however, saw it as me fiddling with more junk. She'd drop by unannounced, usually when I had half a dozen old circuit boards spread across my workbench, wires and tools everywhere. "Alex, what is this mess? You are going to electrocute yourself with all these wires. Why can't you just get a proper desk job? You have a degree, don't you?" She'd wave her hand dismissively at my collection, her nose wrinkled as if smelling something unpleasant. I tried to explain it once. I told her about the thrill of finding a prototype. I told her about the joy of bringing a dead console back to life. I told her about the community, the fellow enthusiasts, who shared my passion, who respected the work I did. She just stared at me blankly, then nodded slowly, like she was humoring a child. "Oh, and how much money does that make you, Alex? Enough to pay off your mortgage?" "I doubt it." Her words always cut deep, mostly because there was a grain of truth in them. The hobby wasn't consistently profitable. It had high points like the prototype card, but also long stretches of just expense and effort. But I had a plan, a big one. For years, rumors had circulated in the retro gaming community about a legendary collection. Not just games, but an entire archive belonging to a reclusive former game developer from the early days of console gaming. This developer was known for groundbreaking, if sometimes quirky, ideas. The rumors spoke of unreleased games, design documents, source code, even unique hardware prototypes. It was the white whale for retro gaming archaeologists. Finding this archive, or even a piece of it, would be like discovering the Dead Sea Scrolls of gaming. I had been following leads for months, maybe even years. It was slow, painstaking work, piecing together fragments of information from old forum posts, faded interviews, and even obituaries. Most people thought it was a myth, but I was convinced it was real. And I had a solid lead on its possible location. An old, abandoned warehouse rumored to have belonged to the developer's family, somewhere upstate, tucked away in a forgotten town. This was my secret project. Consumed me. I spent late nights researching zoning maps, property records, anything that could give me a clue. I used my part-time job earnings to fund discreet trips, hiring a local private investigator for a few hours to confirm ownership. Just small steps. I couldn't tell Chris the full extent of it. He knew I was pursuing a big project, but he didn't grasp the scale of the potential find or the financial risk I was quietly undertaking. He was already stressed about our mortgage. Adding another layer of uncertainty would just make him worry more. Brenda, of course, used my dedication to my project as more fuel for her mockery. I declined a stable full-time job offer, a decent one actually in data entry, because it would have taken too much time away from my research and trips. "Are you insane, Alex?" Brenda shrieked. when she heard about it from my mom. A full-time job with benefits and you turn it down for your dusty old video games? You are going to end up destitute. Chris deserves better. You are being selfish. Her words stung, but I stood my ground. I knew this was a gamble, but I had a gut feeling. This wasn't just a hobby anymore, it was a quest. I was driven by something beyond money, though I knew money was the ultimate goal for our financial stability. I wanted to be the one to unearth this piece of history. I wanted to prove its worth. And deep down, I wanted to prove Brenda wrong. Not just wrong about me, but wrong about the inherent value in pursuing something with passion, even if it seemed unconventional. I remember one particularly rough day. I had just returned from a dead-end trip upstate. The warehouse was empty, just rubble. My lead was wrong. I was exhausted, disheartened, and my savings for the trips were dwindling. That evening, Brenda called. She had just bought a new car, a shiny SUV she couldn't really afford, but wanted to show off. She casually mentioned it, then pivoted. You know, Alex, you should really consider getting a real car, something reliable. Instead of spending all your money on those archaic gadgets. It's just so impractical. Her voice was dripping with condescension. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her about the disappointment, the effort, the hundreds of miles I'd driven in my own beat-up car, chasing a ghost. But I just said, Brenda, I am busy. She laughed. Busy playing old video games, I am sure. Well, good luck with that, Alex. Some of us have real lives. She hung up. That call, more than any other, fueled my determination. I wasn't just chasing a dream anymore. I was chasing vindication. I went back to my research, starting from scratch with a renewed sense of purpose. The warehouse was a bust, but it was a clue. It meant the archive existed, or at least had been intended to exist in that area. I needed to dig deeper, and I did. I found a tiny, almost invisible thread. Property deed registered in a different name, a relative of the developer. A small, unassuming house nearby that Brenda would soon find herself very, very interested in. The financial strain was a constant, dull ache, like a toothache that never quite went away. Our mortgage, even for our modest two-bedroom house, felt like a giant python squeezing us tighter every month. Curious worked hard, but his job wasn't high-paying, and my part-time work barely covered my share of the groceries, let alone half the mortgage. We had enough for the minimum payment usually, but no wiggle room, no savings, no buffer for emergencies. Every unexpected bill felt like a punch to the gut. I tried to hide the full extent of my worries from Chris. He was a kind, steady presence, but he also valued stability. My useless hobby, as Brenda called it, was something he supported because he loved me. But I knew it worried him. He'd suggest cutting back on my hobby expenses, which felt like asking me to cut off a limb. Maybe less on those old game parts, Alex? We could really use that extra $100 this month for the utility bill. He never said it accusingly, just gently, almost pleadingly. And he was right. Brenda, meanwhile, seemed to delight in rubbing salt in the wound. She'd come over, ostensibly to visit my mom who lived nearby, but always made a point of stopping by our place. She'd survey our slightly worn furniture, the older model car in the driveway, and shake her head with a mock sympathetic sigh. Oh, Alex, still driving that old clunker. You know, my new SUV has such great mileage and a comfort. You really should think about upgrade. She never offered to help, of course, just pointed out our deficiencies. One time, my parents came over for dinner. My dad, bless his heart, tried to gently nudge me towards a more stable career. Your Uncle Mark says here is an opening at his company, Alex. Good benefits. steady hours. You could apply. Wouldn't hurt to look right. He knew about my passion, and he tried to be supportive, but the worry lines on his face were clear. Brenda, who happened to drop by briefly, overheard him. She seized the opportunity. "Oh, a job offer. That's wonderful, Alex. See, your dad's right. Sometimes you just need to accept reality. Old video games aren't going to make you rich. You need a regular paycheck for that mortgage." Her words hung in the air. Chris looked uncomfortable. My parents looked worried. I felt a wave of anger, but also a deeper resolve. They didn't understand. They couldn't see the vision I had. This wasn't just about playing games. It was about preserving history and knowing that somewhere out there was a treasure trove waiting to be discovered that could change everything. I had refined my search. After the initial warehouse bust, I focused on the developer's family. Old records showed that the developer, a brilliant but eccentric man named Arthur Pendleton, had a sister who inherited a small, forgotten property after his death. It wasn't the grand estate everyone imagined. It was a modest, slightly dilapidated house in a quiet, forgotten corner of a small town. The kind of place people forget exists. I cross-referenced this with vague mentions in old interviews about Arthur's childhood home. Bingo. The house had been sitting empty for years, overgrown with weeds, boarded up. It looked like any other forgotten relic, but something in my gut told me this was it. This was where Arthur, the ultimate hoarder of his own creations, would have stashed his life's work. The trick was getting access. It was still owned by a distant relative, a great niece, who lived hundreds of miles away and barely knew the house existed, let alone its potential contents. This was where my limited funds really became an issue. To gain legal access, I needed to approach the owner, perhaps offer to clear the property in exchange for first refusal on anything I found, or even buy it outright. But I had no money for a significant offer. I was living on fumes, physically and financially. I had to choose: pay an extra $100 towards the mortgage, or use it for another trip upstate to try and track down this distant relative. The mortgage was due in a week. We were already struggling. I knew Chris would be furious if I prioritized a wild goose chase over our immediate financial stability. But this felt different. This felt like the precipice. I had a feeling, a strong, undeniable premonition, that this was the breakthrough. I spent days agonizing. Finally, I decided I would use the money for the trip. I told Chris I had a job lead that required a short trip, trying to sound vague enough not to lie outright, but also not to worry him. He looked at me, weary, but nodded. "Just be careful, Alex. And come back with something." That trip was probably the most desperate one I made. I drove 8 hours, sleeping in my car, eating cheap instant noodles. I spent 2 days going door to door in the small town, trying to find anyone who knew about the Pendleton family. It felt like chasing a ghost. On the second day, almost out of hope and gas money, I found an elderly woman who remembered the sister. She gave me the name of the great niece, and even a general area where she lived. It was a breakthrough, a tiny ray of light in the deepening financial gloom. I had a name and a potential contact. I was closer than I had ever been, and Brenda was completely oblivious, probably planning her next put down, entirely unaware that her future too was about to be decided by my useless obsession. That elderly woman, bless her heart, gave me the thread I needed. The great niece of Arthur Pendleton, the developer, was named Susan. She lived in a small town several states away. Getting her contact information wasn't easy, but with enough online digging, I found her. She was a quiet, unassuming woman in her 70s, barely remembered her great-uncle Arthur, and certainly had no idea about any legendary game collection. To her, the old house was just a dusty, tax-draining burden. I called her. It was a nervous call. I practiced my pitch a dozen times. I didn't want to sound like a scammer or a crazy person. I explained my passion for retro gaming preservation, my respect for Arthur's work, and my belief that his house might contain historical artifacts. I offered to clean out the house for her, free of charge, in exchange for the rights to any old electronics or documents I might find. I tried to sound professional, respectful, and sincere. Susan was initially wary. "Honey, that house is just full of junk. My Uncle Arthur was a bit of a hoarder. Tea here is nothing valuable in there, trust me. Just old newspapers and broken chairs." She sounded tired, resigned to the burden. But I persisted. "I explained that to me. Those broken chairs might hide forgotten prototypes. Those old newspapers might wrap rare game art." I spoke with genuine passion about preserving history. Eventually, my earnestness won her over. She agreed. She was just happy to have someone deal with the problem. We signed a simple agreement, outlining my access and her ownership of the house, but my rights to any historical materials related to her uncle's work. This was the turning point. It wasn't a payoff, not yet, but it was the permission. It was the moment the door creaked open. I barely slept for weeks. I planned my trip meticulously. I rented a small U-Haul, explaining to Chris that it was for a big find for a client, still keeping the full details vague. He was still stressed about the mortgage, but he saw the excitement in my eyes and he trusted me. The day I arrived at the Pendleton house, my heart was thumping. It was a gloomy, overcast day, perfectly setting the mood. The house itself was small, 2 stories with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. It looked forgotten, forlorn. I carefully unlatched the front door. The air inside was thick with dust and the musty smell of age. Light streamed through gaps in the boards, illuminating motes dancing in the air. It was exactly as Susan described, full of junk. Stacks of old newspapers, broken furniture, moldy clothes. It looked like a daunting, overwhelming task. For the first few days, all I found was typical junk. Old magazines, rusty tools, empty boxes. Doubt began to creep in. Had I been wrong? Was this just a wild goose chase after all? Was Brenda right? Then, in the back of the house behind a rickety bookshelf, I found a hidden door. It led to a small windowless room, barely bigger than a closet. It was completely dark, and when I flipped a light switch, nothing happened. I pulled out my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating shelves packed not with junk, but with neatly organized boxes. Cardboard boxes, but sturdy ones labeled with precise handwriting. Dates, project names, code numbers. My breath hitched. This wasn't junk. This was an archive. I opened the first box. Inside, carefully wrapped in acid-free paper, were circuit boards. Not just any circuit boards, but early versions of a famous console, different from the retail models. Alongside them, bound notebooks filled with detailed schematics and programming notes. It was like finding the blueprints for a hidden civilization. This was it. This was Arthur Pendleton's secret lab, his personal vault. I spent days in that tiny room, meticulously cataloging every item. There were dozens of unreleased game prototypes, some playable, some just code. There were original design documents for games that never saw the light of day, or were drastically changed before release. There were rare development kits, custom hardware modifications, even a personal journal where Arthur mused about the future of gaming. It was an unparalleled find. Every item was a piece of history. I called Chris, barely containing my excitement. "I found it, Chris. I found it. It's incredible." It's beyond anything I imagined. He heard the tremor in my voice, the pure joy. He was cautiously optimistic, but he still didn't grasp the scale. "That's great, honey. So will it help with the mortgage?" he asked, ever practical. "It will more than help," I promised him. "It's going to change everything." I packed everything with extreme care, using every ounce of my expertise to ensure the delicate items were protected. The U-Haul was filled to the brim with boxes that, to Brenda, would still look like junk. But to the right people, these boxes contained untold value. I had several potential buyers in mind, the kind of serious collectors and institutions who understood the historical significance of such a collection. As I drove home, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. The financial strain was still there. The mortgage still loomed, but now I had a weapon against it. I had the means to fight back. I had found my treasure. And Brenda, still oblivious in her shiny SUV, would soon be forced to confront the truth about my useless hobby. Little did she know, her own financial crisis was just around the corner, and the very thing she scoffed at would become her unlikely salvation. The drive back was a blur of excitement and exhaustion. My mind raced, already formulating the next steps. I had the collection, but the real work was just beginning. Appraisal, authentication, and finding the right buyer. This wasn't something you just listed on eBay. This was a historical archive, requiring careful handling and a precise strategy to maximize its value. I arrived home late. Chris was asleep, but I couldn't rest. I spent the next few days in a frenzy of activity. I carefully unpacked everything, setting up a secure climate-controlled space in my spare room. I began photographing, documenting, and cross-referencing every item. My goal was to create a comprehensive catalog that would impress even the most discerning collectors. Brenda, of course, remained oblivious. She called, as usual, to deliver her daily dose of judgment. "Alex, your parents said you rented a U-Haul. What on earth did you fill it with? More of your junk games? You know, you really should declutter. Think of your property value. You'll never sell that house with all your hoarding." She didn't realize that the junk in my spare room was about to make that house. And another one, completely debt-free. I contacted a renowned expert in retro gaming collectibles and historical archives, Dr. Evelyn Reed. She was a legend in the field, known for her rigorous authentication process and her deep understanding of the market. I sent her a detailed preliminary catalog of my finds, along with high-resolution photos of some key items. I didn't hold back. I wanted to make an impression. Her response came quickly, a short email with an urgent tone. "Alex, this is potentially one of the most significant finds in video game history. I need to see this in person. When can I visit?" That email confirmed everything. This was big. Really big. Dr. Reed arrived a week later. She spent 2 full days in my spare room, meticulously examining every item. Her eyes lit up as she held a prototype cartridge, her fingers gently tracing the circuits. She oohed and aheed over the original design documents, reading through Arthur Pendleton's handwritten notes with reverence. "This isn't just a collection, Alex," she said, looking up at me, her face alight with professional awe. "This is a window into the mind of a genius. This is priceless historical material." She then explained the market. There were museums, private collectors, and even some tech companies interested in acquiring such archive. The value wasn't just in the rarity of the games, but in the completeness of the story they told. She estimated the collection, if sold as a whole, could fetch a staggering sum. More than enough to pay off our mortgage, and then some. A lot more. The opportunity was clear, a private auction. Dr. Reed suggested we reach out to a select group of high net worth collectors and institutions. This would ensure competitive bidding and the highest possible price. It would be a discreet invitation-only event, designed to generate maximum interest without making a public spectacle that might attract less serious buyers or even thieves. This was the big risk. We had to invest a significant amount in appraisal fees, security for the collection, and the logistics of the auction. It meant delaying the immediate relief of paying off the mortgage. It meant holding on to the stress for a little longer, pushing our financial limits even further. Chris was initially hesitant. "Alex, can't we just sell 1 or 2 pieces to pay off the mortgage now? This feels like too much of a gamble." I understood his fear, but I knew this was the right path. "Chris, trust me. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. Selling it piece by piece would dilute its value. As a complete archive, it's exponentially more valuable. We wait. We do this right, and we won't just pay off our mortgage. We'll be set for years." I saw the doubt in his eyes, but also the flicker of hope. He agreed with a heavy sigh. "Just don't tell Brenda. She'd have a field day with this gamble." Keeping this secret from Brenda was crucial. She would have found a way to tear it down, to inject her negativity, or worse, to try and insert herself into the process. She wouldn't understand the nuance of an auction, the value of historical preservation, or the sheer scale of the potential payout. She'd just see more useless old toys and a foolish risk. As the auction preparations began, the pressure intensified. The mortgage payment was due, and we were scraping by. I worked my part-time job, but every extra dollar went towards the auction fees. There were days I felt overwhelmed, the weight of expectation heavy on my shoulders. What if no one bid? What if the estimates were wrong? What if Brenda was right all along? But then I'd look at Arthur Pendleton's meticulously labeled boxes, at the history I held in my hands, and I'd remind myself, this was real. This was valuable. This was going to work. And Brenda, in her self-proclaimed sensible life, was about to get a very unexpected, very shocking lesson in what useless truly meant. The period leading up to the private auction was the most intense grind of my life. Sleep became a luxury. I juggled my part-time job, the meticulous preparation of the archive for display, and the constant communication with Dr. Reed and the auction house. Every item had to be catalogued with exquisite detail, its provenance verified, its historical significance articulated. It was like writing a dissertation for every single game cartridge. Brenda, true to form, sensed my exhaustion and decided it was the perfect time for more unsolicited advice. She called almost daily, her voice dripping with concern that sounded suspiciously like judgment. "Alex, you sound terrible. Are you even sleeping? You are going to burn out. All that work on your little hobby projects is clearly taking a toll. Maybe you should take a break, get some fresh air. You know, like people with normal jobs do on their weekends." She had no idea my hobby projects were about to earn me more in one day than she'd make in a decade. My financial situation felt like it was teetering on a knife's edge. The mortgage was a constant threat. We were paying the minimum, but even that was a stretch. Every invoice from the auction house, every security fee, every appraisal cost felt like a punch to the gut. We were investing everything, hoping for the big payoff. Curious was stoic, but I could see the worry etched deeper into his face each day. He worked extra shifts, trying to bridge the gap, but it wasn't enough. We were eating cheaper, turning off lights, doing everything we could to conserve money. One evening, Brenda showed up unannounced, bringing a casserole for my mom, but making a detour to my house. She peered over my shoulder as I was meticulously cleaning a rare development kit. "Still at it, Alex? Doesn't that get boring? You know, you could always learn a marketable skill, something useful, like accounting or real estate, something that actually makes money. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. I heard your mortgage payments are falling behind. Is that true? Mom sounded worried. My blood ran cold. The thought of Brenda knowing about our financial struggles, using it as fodder for her gossip mill, infuriated me. I turned to her, my voice tight. Brenda, my finances are my business, and this boring work is what I choose to do. She laughed. A sharp, dismissive sound. Oh, Alex, you are so stubborn. You live in a fantasy world. Those old games are just a distraction from real life. You'll see. One day you'll wake up and realize you've wasted your youth on nothing. She walked away, shaking her head, convinced she had delivered a profound truth. Her words fueled me. They became the silent vow I made to myself. I would not let her be right. I would prove her wrong, not just for me, but for everyone who dared to pursue a passion that wasn't immediately profitable or sensible. The auction date was set for a private gallery in a major city. Invitations went out to a select group of international collectors, museums, and wealthy tech entrepreneurs. Dr. Reed ensured the marketing materials were exquisite, highlighting the historical significance and the unparalleled rarity of the Pendleton archive. The buzz started to build within the niche community. My phone began to ring with inquiries, cautious interest, and even a few ridiculously low early offers that I politely declined. The week before the auction, our mortgage payment was due. We were short. We had scraped every penny together, but it wasn't enough. I had to call our bank and beg for a short extension, explaining that a large project payout was imminent. They were understanding but firm. A few extra days, that was it. The stress was immense. Chris looked at me, pale with worry. Alex, he whispered, what if this doesn't work? I gripped his hand. It will work, Chris, it has to. I wasn't just saying it. I felt it in my bones. I had put too much into this. Too much time, too much money, too many late nights. Too many endured insults. This collection was my life's work, my passion, and it was about to pay off. The day before the auction, I personally oversaw the transportation of the collection to the gallery. Every box, every cartridge, every document was handled with extreme care. Security was tight, as instructed by Dr. Reed. It was surreal, seeing years of my useless digging, my ridiculed toys, laid out under professional lighting, protected by armed guards. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with numbers, with possibilities, with the image of Brenda's face when she finally learned the truth. The auction was more than just a sale. It was the ultimate vindication. It was the moment I would finally silence the mocking voices, especially Brenda's. And little did I know, the payoff would be so much more complicated and so much more impactful than I could possibly imagine. It wasn't just my mortgage on the line, it was a lot more. The auction day arrived in a haze of nervous energy and anticipation. I wore the only suit I owned, an old one from a cousin's wedding years ago. Chris was there too, looking equally formal and just as nervous. Dr. Reed met us at the gallery, her expression a mix of professional calm and quiet excitement. Interest is significant, Alex, she whispered, a subtle smile on her face. We have multiple serious bidders. The gallery space was elegant and hushed, a stark contrast to the dusty attics and garages, where I usually found my treasures. The Pendleton archive was displayed beautifully, each item carefully arranged in climate-controlled cases, accompanied by detailed descriptions and photos. It wasn't just a collection. It was presented as an exhibition of history. Serious collectors and museum curators milled around, examining the items with a quiet reverence that brought tears to my eyes. This was validation, not just financial, but intellectual. My useless hobby was being treated with the respect it deserved. The auction itself was conducted by a seasoned auctioneer, her voice a rhythmic cadence as she introduced the collection. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. Years of effort, sacrifice, and mockery, all culminating in this moment. The bidding started strong. Private collector from Japan opened with a bid that was already enough to pay off half our mortgage. I squeezed Chris's hand under the table. Then a representative from a major tech company, known for its interest in digital history, counted. The numbers climbed steadily, then rapidly. Each increment felt monumental. My breath caught in my throat. The bids flew back and forth, a dizzying exchange of millions. It wasn't just about the games. It was about the legacy, the unearthing of a genius's hidden work. The room was tense, the air thick with anticipation. My vision blurred slightly, my mind trying to process the scale of the figures being thrown around. This was far beyond anything I had dared to dream. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 minutes, the hammer fell. "Sold," the auctioneer announced, her voice ringing through the silent room. "To the private collector, for $42 million. $42 million. $42 million. The words echoed in my head, surreal and unbelievable. Chris let out a small, choked sound beside me, a mix of disbelief and overwhelming relief. I felt lightheaded, a wave of euphoria washing over me. We had done it, my useless hobby. It wasn't just enough to pay off our mortgage. It was life-changing money. It was generational wealth. Dr. Reed turned to us, her face beaming. "Congratulations, Alex. You've made history today and secured your future." We slipped out of the gallery quietly, wanting to avoid the press that was starting to gather. Outside, the city felt different, brighter, full of possibility. Chris pulled me into a tight hug, burying his face in my shoulder. "We're free, Alex," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We're actually free." Could feel the tension draining from my body, years of financial stress dissolving in an instant. The mortgage, that giant boulder, was gone. No more scraping by, no more worry about utility bills or unexpected repairs. We could breathe. We could plan. We could dream. The immediate aftermath was a blur of paperwork, bank transfers, and cautious celebration. Dr. Reed handled everything with impeccable professionalism, ensuring the transaction was smooth and secure. Within a few days, the funds were in a special account, managed by financial advisors, recommended by Dr. Reed. I called my parents first. They were initially speechless, then overwhelmed with joy and pride. My mom cried. My dad, usually reserved, kept repeating, "I knew you'd do it, son. I knew you'd do something amazing." It was a sweet moment of redemption, even if they hadn't fully understood my part. But the real complex and emotionally charged revelation was still to come. I had Brenda in mind. I could just imagine her smug face when she heard the news. Oh, she would hear it eventually. The retro gaming community was small, and a sale of this magnitude would make headlines in our niche world. It would eventually leak to broader news. But I wanted to be the one to tell her. I wanted to deliver the news myself, face to face. And I had a specific plan for how I would do it. A plan that would make the moment truly unforgettable for her. 'Cause while my useless hobby had just freed us from our mortgage, it was about to do something even more unexpected and profoundly ironic for Brenda. She had no idea the debt she was truly in, and how the very thing she scorned would lift her out. And I was going to be the one to tell her, not just about my mortgage, but about hers too. The days after the auction felt surreal. I kept pinching myself, half expecting to wake up from a very elaborate dream. But the bank statements, the quiet consultations with financial advisors, and Chris's beaming face were all very real. Our mortgage, the beast that had shadowed our lives for so long, was paid off in full. The first thing I did was call the mortgage company, not just to make the payment, but to hear the words, "Your account is now closed. Congratulations." It was pure music to my ears. Chris and I celebrated quietly. We didn't want to make a public spectacle. We ordered pizza, opened a cheap bottle of sparkling wine, and just sat on our living room floor, dreaming aloud about the future. No more financial stress. More time for my passion, maybe even setting up a proper preservation studio. The possibilities were endless. But in the back of my mind, the thought of Brenda simmered. How would she react? Would she be genuinely happy for me? Or would her jealousy and condescension overwhelm her? I knew Brenda well enough to bet on the latter. She thrived on being right, on being superior. This would challenge her entire worldview. I decided to tell her in person. It felt important. I wanted to see her face. I knew she'd eventually hear about the auction through my parents, or through some online article. But I wanted to control the narrative, at least for a moment. And there was that other detail, the big twist that I had to deliver myself. Before I could even initiate the meeting, however, life delivered an unexpected plot twist on Brenda's end. My mother called me, her voice laced with deep concern. "Alex, have you talked to Brenda lately? She's in real trouble. She lost her job. And with the house market going the way it is, she's underwater on her mortgage. The bank is threatening foreclosure." My heart sank. Not because I felt sorry for Brenda in that moment. The years of mockery had built a wall. But because it complicated things. It meant Brenda wasn't just going to be surprised by my news. She was going to be desperate. And my news, ironically, would hit her at her absolute lowest point. It almost felt cruel, but it wasn't my fault. I learned more from my mom. Brenda had been laid off quietly months ago, but had kept it a secret, trying to find another job without success. She had been draining her savings, trying to keep up with the payments on the house she bought to prove her sensibility. Her sensible life was unraveling, just as my useless life was finally reaching its peak. This information solidified my decision on how to approach Brenda. I wouldn't just tell her about my mortgage. I would tell her about hers too. But why? Why would I help the person who constantly tore me down? It wasn't an act of forgiveness, not entirely. It was more complex. It was partly because, despite everything, she was family. My mother loved her niece, and my mother had always worried about Brenda, even if Brenda never showed her own family much kindness. But it was also a different kind of justice, a poetic, almost brutal form of triumph. I would save her, using the very thing she scorned, and she would have to live with that knowledge. It was a victory, but a bittersweet one. I called Brenda and asked her to meet me for coffee. I chose a neutral place, a quiet cafe, to avoid any potential public scenes. She sounded weary, her usual sharp edge dulled by stress. She agreed, sounding resigned. I could tell she expected me to offer advice, or maybe a small loan, but nothing more. She had no idea the earthquake that was coming. I prepared myself mentally for the confrontation. I wasn't seeking an apology, though. It would be nice. I was seeking a reckoning. I was going to deliver the ultimate mic drop. I walked into the cafe, saw Brenda sitting there looking pale and drawn, and took a deep breath. This wasn't just about money. This was about respect. It was about validation. And it was about a deeply complicated family bond that, despite everything, still existed. I sat down, took a sip of water, and looked her straight in the eye. I could see the lines of worry on her face, the signs of sleepless nights. She still had that air of superiority, but it was cracking. This was my moment. This was the moment I got to tell her that the useless hobby, the one she relentlessly mocked, wasn't just successful. It was about to become her lifeline, and the look on her face when she realized it would be priceless. Brenda looked across the table at me, a forced smile on her lips. "So, Alex," she began, her voice brittle, "what's so important that you needed to meet? Mom mentioned you had some good news about your little projects. Did you finally sell one of your old game boxes for, what, a few $100s?" The sarcasm was still there, but it lacked its usual bite. Her eyes were hollow, betraying her exhaustion. I leaned forward, my gaze steady. "Brenda, I didn't sell one of my old game boxes for a few $100s. I paused, letting the silence hang. I sold an entire archive, a historical collection of unreleased games and development materials, for $42 million. Her forced smile wavered. Her eyes widened, then narrowed in disbelief. 42 what? Million? Alex, are you joking? That's ridiculous. Your little hobby, that's impossible. She let out a short, incredulous laugh, as if trying to dismiss it as a bad joke. It's not a joke, Brenda, I said, my voice calm but firm. The Arthur Pendleton collection. It was auctioned off this week. It made headlines in the gaming and tech world. You can look it up. Her face went through a rapid series of emotions. Disbelief, then a flicker of fear, followed by anger. You mean you've been sitting on something like that while you were struggling with your mortgage? While you turned down a real job? You let everyone worry about you, and you had millions. How could you be so irresponsible? Her voice started to rise, hitting that familiar strident tone. I didn't flinch. I wasn't sitting on it, Brenda. I was working on it. For years, piecing together clues, investing my time and what little money I had. I took a calculated risk that you constantly mocked. You called it useless. You told me to get a real job. You told me I was wasting my life. I let those words hang in the air, a silent accusation. She glared at me, her cheeks flushed. Well, fine. So you got lucky. A fluke. That doesn't mean your hobby is a real job. It doesn't mean your hobby is a real job. It doesn't mean you weren't irresponsible with your life. You could have lost everything. But I didn't, Brenda. I gained everything. I took a deep breath, preparing for the true bombshell. My mortgage is paid off, Brenda. My house is fully owned. We're debt-free. She blinked, taking that in. Her anger seemed to deflate slightly, replaced by a grudging, resentful silence. She probably expected me to gloat, to rub it in. And I was in a way, but not in the way she expected. And not just mine, Brenda, I continued, my voice dropping to a level tone that compelled her to listen. Yours too. Her eyes snapped up, wide with utter confusion. What are you talking about, my mortgage? Alex, have you lost your mind? No, Brenda, I haven't, I said, pulling a folded document from my jacket pocket. It was a certified letter from her back. I know you lost your job. I know you are facing foreclosure. I know you are underwater on your house. Her face went pale, a mixture of shame and shock. And I know your mortgage payment was due today, so I paid it. All of it. I slid the document across the table. She stared at it, her hand trembling slightly as she picked it up. She read the words, her eyes scanning the official letterhead. Your mortgage balance is now 0. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. Disbelief, humiliation, a flash of something that might have been gratitude quickly suppressed. Why? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Why would you do that? After everything I said? Because despite everything, Brenda, you are family, I said, choosing my words carefully. And because my parents were worried sick about you. And because I needed you to know, unequivocally, that the useless hobby you mocked, the one you said would never amount to anything, saved not just my home, but yours too. Silence. A profound, heavy silence filled the space between us. Her eyes were glistening, but she quickly blinked back any tears. The usual venom, the smugness, the condescension, all gone, replaced by a raw, naked vulnerability I had never seen from her before. She was looking at me, not as the irresponsible cousin, but as the person who, against all odds, had just handed her a lifeline. The hearth-breaking part wasn't just the years of mockery, it was this moment, the stark contrast between her cruelty and my unexpected generosity. The realization that the very thing she dismissed had, in her moment of greatest need, become her salvation. It was a complex, tangled knot of emotions. Triumph for me, humiliation for her, and a strange, undeniable sense of familial obligation that transcended all the bitterness. It was an act of profound, almost passive-aggressive kindness. She would never be able to mock my hobby again, not without knowing it was the source of her own freedom. And that, in itself, was a powerful kind of justice. Brenda sat across from me, clutching the letter that declared her mortgage paid off. Her face was a canvas of conflicting emotions: shock, disbelief, a hint of shame, and perhaps a grudging flicker of gratitude. She didn't speak for a long time, the usual quick retort or condescending remark absent. It was the longest silence I had ever experienced with her. Finally she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. But why? After all I said to you? "'Cause Brenda," I repeated. "You are family, and no matter what, family looks out for each other, even when it's hard, even when tea here is a lot of history." I didn't try to make it sound like pure altruism. It wasn't. There was an element of triumph in it, a desire for her to truly understand the depth of her misjudgment. And because I wanted you to understand that passion, true dedication, can be valuable in ways you never imagined. Sometimes the most useless things can save you. She looked at the letter again, then up at me. Her eyes were still a little watery. "I don't know what to say. I never thought. I just, She trailed off, unable to articulate the enormity of the years of her judgments, her snide remarks, her constant undermining of my choices, all came crashing down in that moment. She was being saved by the very thing she had ridiculed. I didn't expect a grand apology, and I didn't get one in that moment. What I got was something more profound. A quiet acceptance of a truth she had vehemently denied for years. The barrier between us, built brick by brick with her condescension, finally cracked. It wasn't gone. Not entirely, but it was irrevocably damaged. The impact on our relationship was immediate and palpable, though slow to evolve. Brenda didn't suddenly become my best friend. The humiliation was too raw. But her mockery stopped. Completely. When we next saw each other at a family gathering, she was subdued. She didn't ask about my projects or my finances. She just looked at me differently, with a new, quiet respect. Sometimes she would even offer a hesitant compliment, like "Your house looks nice, Alex," without the usual follow-up jab. For me, the victory was twofold. First, the financial freedom was liberating beyond word. Kiris and I could finally plan for the future without the weight of debt. We invested wisely, ensuring long-term security. I even started a small foundation dedicated to retro game preservation, using a portion of the funds to ensure other hidden gems of gaming history could be found and saved. My useless hobby was now literally funding a useful cause. Second, the vindication. Not just for me, but for anyone who's ever been told their passion is a waste of time. It wasn't about the money, not entirely. It was about proving that dedication, even to something unconventional, has inherent worth. It was about showing that judging someone's path before it reaches its destination is a fool's errand. My useless hobby didn't just pay off my mortgage, it paid off Brenda's too. It was the ultimate ironic twist. It was a story of a mocked passion leading to unimaginable success. And in doing so, creating a complex, heartbreaking moment of unexpected grace. Brenda was free, but her freedom came with the humbling realization that she was saved by the very thing she despised. Looking back, I don't regret a single hour I spent digging through dusty boxes, fixing old consoles, or chasing obscure leads. Every insult, every skeptical glance, every moment of financial stress, all contributed to the immense satisfaction of that final payoff. Taught me the power of perseverance, the quiet strength in pursuing what you love, and the profound, often uncomfortable, truth about human connection. Brenda and I will never be truly close. The scars of her mockery run too deep. But here is a fragile, unspoken understanding between us now. She learned a hard lesson about judgment, and I learned that true success isn't just about financial gain, but about the quiet triumph of proving yourself right, even when the world and your own family tells you you are wrong. And sometimes, in the most unexpected ways, that triumph can even extend a helping hand to those who once doubted you the most. It's a complicated, messy, and ultimately a very human story of what happens when a useless hobby becomes a